يا ليلة القدر يا فضل بارنا خير من الدهر بالعفو تاتينا. يا ليلة القدر يا فضل بارنا.
Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, and welcome to the Daily Ramadan show, where we will discuss the daily du'as to be recited in this holy month of blessings, mercy, and forgiveness. I'm your host, Naya Parmar. Today we are going to discuss the 7th daily du'a, and you have to keep in mind that these du'as are not just ways to ask for things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're supposed to be your goals, your ideals, and your reminders for what you want to ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, before expecting anything from Allah, after you ask for those values, you, as He has said, take one step toward me and I shall take 10 steps towards you. You should show Him that you really want those values to be instilled, which is why you should make the first move. Now, as usual, I'll start with the English translation of the dua, and then I'll continue with the explanation of what the dua is talking about. And finally, when we have understood the dua, I will recite it in its Arabic form, and you, the viewers, will follow along. Today's dua reads, O Allah, on this day, help me observe fasting and do acts of worship, and keep me away on this day from slips and sins, and grant me reference to you throughout it, out of your guiding to success, O the guide of the misled ones. So we'll discuss the first line first, which reads, O Allah, on this day, help me observe fasting and do acts of worship. Now, I mentioned on the first day the purpose of fasting, which is to achieve righteousness, that you may achieve taqwa, righteousness. When you receive righteousness, okay, your soul, your status gets elevated in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as I mentioned yesterday or day before yesterday, everything that Allah thinks about you is crucial. It's very important because He's our creator, and His thinking towards us will affect us all in some way or the other. So, so why do we need Allah's help to fast? Isn't fasting just staying away from food and water? I mean, we have stayed away. There are days when we go without breakfast, lunch, sometimes dinner, and sometimes we don't even think we need water. So why do we need Allah's help to stay hungry and thirsty? Because, as I mentioned on the first day, and I hope you remember it, fasting is a spiritual act of worship. It is not just a physical way of staying away from hunger and thirst. While fasting, you're supposed to train yourself. You're supposed to avoid using your body parts the way Allah does not want you to use them. Meaning you cannot use them for evil purposes. You're supposed to stay away from evil. So when your physical body is relieved of its of food and water, meaning when your physical body is emptied, that is when your soul can receive its nourishment. That is when your soul can receive its nourishment, and your soul can get elevated in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our hunger and one very important thing to note is that our hunger and thirst is not what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for instead is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to get elevated, and we do this through hunger and thirst. Now, the second thing I want to say is that, okay, there are two traditions that I would like to mention. The first one is the best of worship is that when you love Allah, when you love for the sake of Allah and you hate for the sake of Allah. What does this mean? This means that the best of worship is when it comes through your mind, comes through your heart. Because when you just do something, when you do an action, when you perform an action, no one can see what you're thinking, yeah? And no one can describe you based on what you do. They describe you based on your intentions. Like, I may be doing something good, but I could be doing it to show off. I could be doing it to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one knows for sure except Allah. And that is why He is the only one who can tell, who is higher in His eyes, And so, the second tradition reads, we see a moment of contemplation is better than 70 years of worship. A moment of contemplation, of thinking, of reflecting, of concentration is better than 70 long years of worship. See how intention can make the most of everything. Now, what I'm trying to point out here is that when you perform an act of worship, to get it to the next level, to get it to the best quality, you need concentration. If you remembered, I had mentioned on the first day that to make your prayer of the best quality, you need to avoid absent-mindedness, which is the opposite of concentration. So in a way, I meant that you need to bring more concentration in your prayer, which is an act of worship, in order to make it of the best quality. Now, in the same way, every act of worship, if you bring in concentration, if you bring in pondering and thinking and reflecting, then you can get it to the next level because your intention matters the most. This way, your worship can be considered an act of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, everything you do is supposed to be only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And okay, the third point I would like to note out here is that you know how many people, what they aim for is raising the best family, getting the best job, raising your career sky high, becoming famous. But no, that's not your right aim in this world. Your aim in this world is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your aim in this world is to elevate your status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship Him, etc. And so you need to follow the right path. You need to make sure that you can actually call yourself a true servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar are also very important. So you need to enjoin others to do the same. You need to invite others towards Islam as well. Now we'll discuss the second line, and keep me away from slips and sins. What we're asking for here is obvious. We're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, I do not want to sin unintentionally. I do not want to do anything without a reason, because when you do something accidentally, you do it without a purpose. You don't have a purpose in mind. And it's very important to have a reason for doing everything, to have an intention for doing everything. This way, you have an actual base for your life. Now, the problem with many people is that their fasts are based on purely hunger and thirst. They do not fast to receive righteousness. They just fast for the sake of fasting, to say that they're fasting. Now, this is wrong. You need to fast for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you need to fast so that you can bring a change in your life. See, Ramadan is the month of training. And if you go and see many people, many of us don't go through a change after the month of Ramadan, after the month of blessings, mercy, and forgiveness. We don't go through any positive changes. And we need to work on this. Sometimes people get lazy. This is very natural. It's like when you want to do something spiritual, you need an actual, a huge push because your nafs is saying, I'm too lazy to do this, please don't do this, please don't make me do it, etc. See, this mostly happens for spiritual acts of worship, like fasting and prayer. See, if you go and see, when you want to physically uplift your body by going to the gym, not many people feel lazy, but when they're asked to pray, to spiritually raise their souls, they need a really big push. So that's a very important point to consider, that you need to control your soul. You need to control your nafs. You need to tell your nafs that I'll do what I want to do. You cannot come in the way of my desires. Now this is a very good point to note. In this world, there's always two consequences for every law that you break. For every law that you break, there's two consequences. One is that you harm yourself. See, every law in this world, most of the laws in this world are made for your own good. So you have the law of not passing the red light. So because when during a red light, there's some other cars passing, right? So if you pass a red light, you'll probably get an accident. Now the other consequence is you'll have to pay a fine, or you'll probably have to go to court, etc. Now this many people ignore. The same goes for the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every law of His is for our own good. And there's always two consequences. One, it will make a dent in our character. And two, it will bring punishment, some sort of punishment. Now, it is not necessary that these consequences will occur in the hereafter. They could probably come up in this world and we probably won't notice it, but they will be there. For example, you lie, it will make a dent in your character. You won't be the same ever again. See, as I mentioned yesterday, the stages of sinning. At first you feel regret, but then that regret turns into pride. And you start questioning the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that makes a huge dent in your character. You'll never be the same again. So in this line we ask that, "O Allah, I do not want to transgress any of your laws, even if it's unintentionally." The third line reads, "And grant me reference to you throughout it." We'll discuss this line after a short break.
ليلة القدر يا فضل بارنا خير من ليلة القدر يا فضل بارنا خير من
Welcome back to the Daily Ramadan Show, where we discuss the daily du'as to be recited in this holy month in this holy month of blessings, mercy, and forgiveness. Until now, we have discussed the first two lines of the seventh daily dua. In the first line, we spoke a bit about acts of worship and how to bring it to the next level, and we mentioned a bit about fasting and what it really is, and what your whole purpose is supposed to be, which is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to achieve righteousness. In the second line, we discussed the slips and sins, performing sins unintentionally. We said that when you do this, you feel kind of guilty, at first, because you want to lead a life with a base. You want to have a focus when you're fasting. You don't want to fast for hunger and thirst. You want to fast for elevating your soul. And then we also spoke a bit about the two consequences of breaking a law: harming yourself and the punishment, maybe a fine or going to court, etc. Now we're going to discuss the third line, which reads, "And grant me reference to you through it." Here we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "O Allah, keep me alive in your remembrance always." The Arabic term used in this line is rizq. And as we mentioned a few days back, rizq is provision. Rizq is sustenance. Rizq is something you require, something you need. Now here, it's actually in a different context, because over here you're asking for rizq from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this remembrance is, the Arabic word for it is dhikr. So you're asking for your sustenance that comes through the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now what is dhikr? Dhikr is obviously the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But is it just taking out a tasbih and then leaving it on the side? No. Dhikr is not temporary. When you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you cannot just temporarily wake up in the morning, remember Him through Fajr prayer, and then go through the rest of your busy day, your busy life, and just forget about Him. No, you cannot do that. You have to keep Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your mind the whole time. The least you can do is keep Him in your mind, and in every action you perform, know that He is watching you. Now some people may say that they're too busy, but how can you be too busy for your Creator who actually created you? This is the least you can do, keeping Him in your mind. And as I mentioned before, take 5 minutes every single day. Take 5 minutes, just go into sajda and think about Him. Ponder, reflect, concentrate, so that you may be wise. So here you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Oh Allah, I want I want to remember you always. I do not want to forget you. So you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, help me, assist me, so that you're in my mind the whole time, because you don't want him to slip out of your mind. Because your base, as I mentioned, your base for every action should be to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life, and you don't want your whole life to be based on raising a good family or getting the best career. Okay, fine, you can get that as your goal, but you have to prioritize, and your highest goal, your biggest goal should be pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The month of Ramadan is the month of training, and we're going through a phase. We're going through this whole month with him in our mind, and then soon we should remember him in other months as well. Now, the fourth line is, out of your guiding to success, O the guide of the misled ones. Here we want to realize here that this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not only guide the believers, He guides those who go astray as well. He guides those who are disbelievers. Now, we end this beautiful dua with a beautiful line, okay, that brings hope in our hearts that, if we fall down, if we unintentionally do sin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will pick us up with His infinite mercy. He will pick us up and He will get us back on our feet. This is the month of Ramadan, the month of training, and we have to make sure that we stay on our feet. We do not want to fall in this month. This is the month of training, the month that will impact the rest of your year or your lives probably. And now that we understand this dua, I'll start in Arabic. But before that, I'll just do a recap. The first line, we spoke about acts of worship and what true fasting is. While speaking about the acts of worship, we mentioned that it should be for the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to bring it to the next level, you should bring concentration in it. And in the second line, we discussed a bit about slips and sins. We discussed about unintentionally sinning and the two consequences of breaking a law, which is harming yourself and a punishment like paying a fine or going to court, etc. In the third line, we discussed about the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how it cannot be temporary, because our whole life should be devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the fourth line, I spoke about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all merciful, and how He not only picks up those who believe in Him, He also assists the disbelievers in the best of ways. I'll remember what each line talks about and follow while I'm reciting the Arabic dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma a'inni ala siyamihi wa qiyamih, وجنبني فيه من حفواته وآثامه وارزقني فيه ذكرك بدوامه بتوفيقك يا هادي المضلين. Thank you for watching the Daily Ramadan Show, where we discuss daily duas. May Allah grant us all tawfiq and strength to instill all these values we discussed today into our lives. Ameen. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with the next dua. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.